Hello, Manya. Thank you so much for joining us today. We can all see and hear you clearly.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Manya Bunch, and I'm one of the members of the ALFDP Annual Meeting and Conference Planning Committee. I am very pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's program, Best Practices for Coaching White Men in Times of Racial Injustice and Community Unrest, facilitated by Paula Edgar, Esquire. Paula is a partner of Inclusion Strategy Solutions, LLC, a consulting firm that provides innovative and strategic solutions on organizational diversity efforts. She is an expert in inclusive executive leadership development, personal branding, networking, social media, and career strategies. Paula previously served as the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer at New York Law School, and she is also a past president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association in New York City. Thank you all for your participation, and I now turn it over to Paula. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I think the answer is yes. Okay, good. I got some yeses. Excellent. I am so excited to be here with all of you today to talk about this very important and timely topic. I will be sharing my slides in just a moment and going back and forth between the slides and some exercises that I want you to do with me. And so big shout out to all my peeps, and I hope that at the end of this, all of us will be peeps. So let me go ahead and share and talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So here we go. I'm hoping I'm hitting the right one. No, I stopped. I'm in the wrong one. Hold on. Okay. Give me just a second, and I'm going to share the right screen. And that will help me. There we go. Okay. Now you should be able to see my slides, which essentially welcomes you to this session. My social media is here. Those of you who know me know that I love a hashtag and love a connection on LinkedIn. So if we are not already connected, please make sure that we get connected soon. We're going to be talking about best practices for coaching white men in times of racial injustice and community unrest. How did we get here? Before we talk about that, this is me. I love this picture of myself. And since Manya gave me such a wonderful introduction, I don't need to say much more other than this. All of this is my LinkedIn headline. So please definitely make sure we connect there. So now, how did we get here? This has been the longest 8 months of probably all of our lives. And given that we are still in a global pandemic and have experienced so much, particularly in the work that we do, having to do with racial injustice and being within the legal profession, which, as we know, can be often a facilitator in terms of being part of the solution and often part of where we need to do deep work in order to get ourselves in that place of being a solution. I am showing you a slide that has a picture of George Floyd on it from the New Yorker magazine, as well as lots of other people who have been affected by violence and racial trauma and violence over the years, all the way back from the institution of slavery. And this image is very sobering. It helps us to reflect on the work that we have to do when it comes to racial justice. And I use it to kind of call our attention to what we've been through, not just in these past months since George Floyd was killed on May 25th, but the hundreds of years of racial injustice and systemic oppression of Black and Brown people in this country. So I'll start this by saying that Black Lives Matter, which a lot of law firms said this summer, which was, I think, an interesting catalyst to where we are right now. So we saw some headlines, right? There was a momentum that occurred right after the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and of course, Breonna Taylor. So you see headlines indicating that it's time for us to be a part of the change. Black Lives Matter is not just external, it's also internal. Lots of calls for social justice. With that same deep reflection of understanding that we, as the legal profession, still have work to do when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. So with that being our sort of landscape that we're living in, I thought we really need to have a discussion about where the facilitators are and where the barriers are for this work. And we know that often within leadership in law firms, the leaders are white men. And as we are having our dialogue today about this, I am thinking of, and invite you to think of, not just white men generally, but a white male leader. You know, for most of the firms that you're all with, that should not be hard. Some of the challenges that are associated with coaching white men include awareness or lack thereof, just power dynamics in general, which we're going to get into a little bit more, them reflecting on or not reflecting on their privilege, outward resistance, and sometimes resistance that is not clear but exists, particularly in the work that you do. And it shows up in this way. I want to be fair, I'm colorblind, I'm apolitical, right? I just need to lead. And that can be a challenge, let's say that. So you have folks who don't care, those who care but don't know what to do, those who know what to do but have made some mistakes, and then those who know or want to do something but won't listen to your recommendations. And I'm hoping, and I'm probably right, thinking that some of this probably resonates with you deeply because of the work that we all do, interacting with people in power, and in particularly here, white men in power within the law firm space. So I thought it would be instructive for us to do a quick exercise. And as you see here, we have on the bottom of the screen a website and a code. So we're going to do an interactive exercise really quickly. You're going to visit menti.com, menti.com, and you're going to put in the code that is on the screen in order for you to participate. And it's 7015448. 7015448. You can use your phone, or you can use any browser on your computer. And I'm going to stop sharing right now and ask you all to go to the site, and I'm going to change the slide. You'll see the slide now says, in 3 words or phrases, what are your greatest concerns when it comes to coaching white men? So I need to hear a little bit of feedback from you, and then we'll jump into what I think some of your greatest concerns are, but I'd like to hear from you first. So go ahead and do that, and I'll put the code in here again. It's 7015448, and the website is menti.com. Okay, I see some of you are already on there, so good. It's working. Oops. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. We're at 2:03. I will give you till 2:04.5. I got a lot of content to cover, and I want to really be responsive to your questions. I'm going to share the word cloud that is going to emerge, but I can see some consistency happening already and some alignment, and hopefully you'll be able to see that as well. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. Okay, give you 30 seconds more. And what happens is the slide will continue to update while you're doing this. So I'm going to wait till it slows down a bit. We've got 55 responses so far. Thank you for engaging with me. As an extrovert, I really actually need you to engage with me because I'm suffering in this quarantine that we're in, and these are not easy topics. We're at 65, 66, 70. All right, you've got 30 seconds more, and then I'm going to ask you to stop hitting submit so that I can share with you what you said. Okay. Stop hitting submit in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay. Take a look. So we'll see some of the results are still coming in, but with 86 of you responding, we've got defensiveness as one of the largest words on the screen. Resistance, arrogance, disinterest, defensive, ignorance, backlash, lack of empathy, apathy, white fragility, pushback, exhaustion, anger, indifference, arrogance, self-preservation, unaware of the problem, lack of commitment, them shutting down, misinterpretation, disengagement, stubborn, denial of racism, I'm already perfect, hesitant to make waves, they won't listen, power struggle, exasperation, politics, confusion, unaware, engagement. So their fragility, open to coaching or not, rejection, but egos, hostile, offending BIPOC, D&I as a checkbox. So I would imagine, just knowing some of you and doing this work, that you may feel a little deep, a sigh of relief because everybody else is experiencing the same thing that you are. So I hope that that gave you a little bit of, it's not just me and this is not just my issue, because it's not. And that's why I pitched this as something I thought we should be talking about. I'm going to stop sharing, and don't worry, I will share the results that worked out with you. I'm sure that you want to reflect back on it again, and I'll talk about some of the resources that I've created for your edification at the end of the session. All righty, so you know, for the rest of the session, I am going to leave that Menti slide up for your comments and questions. So you'll see now that it would have changed on your slide. You can ask me or anything or make any comments, and I'll be checking in as we go. So, but I won't be sharing it on the screen. I'll just be checking it in order for me to help facilitate this while I go through the content. So let's jump in. I'm going to go ahead. Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to go ahead and then share these slides again. Hopefully I share the right one again this time. Of course not. One more time. Alrighty. Share the right one. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. Now, so I'm going to go through the slides. You can ask me any questions, and you can make any comments you'd like. I see a couple of you are just saying hi. Hi. Yes, someone asked if the questions or comments are anonymous. The answer is yes. Okay. So I have developed 10 strategies just reflecting on the work that I do for coaching white men in times of racial injustice and community unrest, which is currently now and all summer. And unfortunately, given the systems of oppression that we live within, will probably be something we'll have to be thinking about for a while. So we're going to cover self-care as a diversity professional, trust, awareness, education, empathy, what's in it for me, encouraging leaders to engage in dialogue, managing resistance, activate, and accountability. Those are the 10 areas that I developed in sort of thinking about what I know from each of you that I connect with all the time, and then what I engage with when I coach and engage with white men as well. So right up front, you should be thinking about a white male leader, like I said before, when you're reflecting on this whole journey we're going to go on. And then also think about the fact that this is only an hour, and probably is going to give me a little less because we started a little later. So I want to continue the conversation. You know, let's make sure that we can support each other in this work. It's not easy work, which is why self-care is the first thing. So you have to check in with yourself. Number one, issues of racial injustice and community unrest are not just segmented because they're happening external, right? What the walls of every workplace, even though we're in a pandemic and some of us are at home, they're porous, right? Everything that's outside comes inside, and that's a sort of line that we'll be talking about throughout the whole session. And so it doesn't not affect you, right? The double negative, it affects you. It affects each of us in different ways, depending on where you are in terms of your diversity characteristics. It might affect you in a very different way, but doing this work does not kind of take us away from being able to compartmentalize that it's happening, particularly within our communities. So you have to reflect, how are you processing the event and the issue, whatever has happened? As I was thinking about this, I thought of George Floyd throughout kind of putting this together, but it could be anything. It could have been, you know, something recent, some of the protests that occurred, and just sort of reflect on whatever is present for you. Can you compartmentalize the things in order to be effective? And my favorite is bullet point number 3, is do you need to? Because oftentimes as diversity professionals, we think, especially if you don't have a team, do I have to put this all on my shoulders? There may be someone else who you can support in this to coach this white male leader in an effective way in which they might be able to hear differently. But one of the benefits I think that has occurred in this past, the momentum of the summertime, was that ears are open in a very different way, and people are seeing some of the value and skill set of you as a cohort and the work that you do in a very different way if they were not focused and valuing in the way they should have before. So that I would check as one of the benefits. So self-care is the first thing, right? When you're coaching, you have to check in with yourself in order to be effective to coach someone else, okay? Okay. You have to then reflect on where trust is in the relationship that you have with the white male leader that you're thinking of. Do they trust? Have they bought into diversity and inclusion generally, or as someone put on the word cloud, is it just check the box? Are they doing it kicking and screaming, or are they trying to be an ally in training? Just, kind of gauge for yourself where you are with this person. Do they trust your knowledge? For the folks who don't, who think this is check the box or don't really get it, oftentimes they will kind of put their issue onto the person or persons who drive this work, and that can erode some of the trust that you want to develop in order to effectively coach someone. Again, can you be authentic with this person and within the confines of our profession, right? Authentic and with them. And do they trust that you'll be able to do so? And that authenticity is sometimes being able to tell them, no, that's not going to work, or I understand, but you really need to focus on this thing, and to have them hear you in a way that will be productive. Can they be vulnerable? Right? We're going to get into a little bit more of the white male leader psyche in a bit, but vulnerability is not necessarily something that I would choose as one of the first adjectives, usually, that I would attribute to, and again, I know I'm making stereotypes here. I'm doing it to be instructive, but you take the person who you're thinking of and align these questions and the things that I'm talking about to that or them in order to help you. Again, like I said, there's going to be resources at the end of this. If they can be vulnerable with you, they can say, I don't know anything about this. I'm actually not even sure if this matters to me. Why should I care? Why shouldn't I prioritize XYZ thing over this? And then at least you'll know where you are. It is harder to actually coach somebody when they're not being authentic and not being vulnerable, because you don't exactly know where they are and what they're going to be willing to do. And it feels more like you're doing the heavy lifting rather than you're coming together to do this work. So the first thing you have to do is make them aware of whatever's happened. On May 26th, I started getting a lot of texts, a lot of emails. This thing's happening. What am I supposed to do? How do I address the essential trauma that we're all collectively experiencing? And you think about that institutionally within your own individual institute. Some people it's not a part of their everyday. Right? It's not a part of them tapping in to the news cycle, or the news cycle that they might have may not be focused on certain incidents having to do with racial injustice or community unrest. So it's important for you to alert them of what has gone on, and both the internal impact, right? So for example, if you've had people reaching out already to talk about how painful this has been, whatever the incident is for them in the context of doing the work, whether actually engaging with folks or just managing, period. One of the hardest parts about what happened this summer was that this is my opinion, obviously all of this is my opinion, but I think that this was different because we were in a global pandemic. Many of us were quarantined and in our homes, and we had to focus on what had happened when it came to George Floyd in a very different way than we might have if we were able to be kind of out and about and really compartmentalize what had happened. Because if you reflect on this is not the first time that we have seen the trauma of Black death essentially shown to us, and then racial injustice and all of the systems that go into where we are and how this could have happened. But we've never experienced this in a global pandemic, right? We've never had only to focus on what was going on and to really have to sit with the discomfort of, of the newer pandemic of renewed racial violence and trauma and injustice. It's important when you make the coachee aware of what's going on that you have already some thoughts about what you would like to recommend them to do. But I find with coaching white male leaders is that they also want to have agency. And so a good coaching recommendation would be to say, are you aware? Let's talk about some of the internal versus external context. And then say, I have some ideas, but I want to hear what your thoughts are first. What do you think that you should do as an individual and leader? What do you think the firm should do organizationally in order to respond to what is happening? Awareness is not education. And all of you also know that we're in different places on our spectrum in terms of the where we're educated and what we know and what we think we know versus what we actually do know when it comes to racism, systemic institutional racism, and its individual impacts on us and the work that we do. So you have to kind of put some context on it. Again, if you've done work with this leader before, you may know that they've already taken, unconscious bias training, maybe anti-racism training, or you've had dialogues about this before or not. And if your perception is that that they are going to come to this with the I already know, like that was a couple of the different pieces that were reflected on, like they already think that they know what the issue is and they're educated enough so they're not open to being coached. That's problematic. So the way that I would frame this would be, yes, of course we know that you know XYZ thing, whatever it is that you think that they know, but I really want to refresh your memory, and I really want to talk about how this sits into the context of everything else happening societally and then obviously granularly within the firm space. To the extent that you can recommend to them to have an understanding of their bias, particularly if they haven't done any training, they have to grapple with some of the discomfort, right? And that's not an easy thing. If I said to all of you, let me give you, a bag of discomfort as your gift, your takeaway gift, you would not run towards it, right? No one wants to be uncomfortable, and yet we can make the place and space a little safer for them to feel discomfort, and that's what a good coaching relationship ends up being. And that's why I started with trust, and that's why I started with reflecting on the nature of a relationship, because you have to see sort of where you are. You can also actually educate them with internal data, right? So our Black Affinity group has met. We did a listening session, and these are some of the feedback that we've received from that group in terms of how they're feeling right now, and also in what their expectations are from the leader or from the firm in terms of a response. And many of you know that there was this groundswell of activism internally within firms, not just from Black attorneys, but from people who just were like, enough is enough. Often, catalyzed by affinity groups or diversity and inclusion committees, because that's where people go to talk about these things. There's a couple of questions that I'm going to get into about being emotionally exhausted, and the challenge. We're going to get to it, I promise. So we're in education. You have to go again. Think about what resources would be helpful. This summer, people put together these compendiums, and it was like, here's this long scroll of everything you need to know in order to be, as woke as possible. And what I found in the people who I was coaching was they were overwhelmed. Where do they even start? Is there like baby steps to anti-racism, to, I'm in my teenage years and then now I'm a college graduate. There wasn't a lot of that. So I recommend 3 to 5 resources at a maximum for the beginning dialogue for anything, especially when it's something that's going to cause pain, right? They're not reading something that's fun and fluffy. It is about what has gone on. I would recommend, if you're thinking about the context of how this lives, some baseline that might be a TED Talk or a quick YouTube video, just literally about this topic. They might think I already know and they don't want to access it, but you will be able to say that you provided it. And you can also say, I recommend you refresh your memory on this prior to having stakeholder conversations, which we're going to talk about next. Okay. So in that education piece, important, empathy. Empathy is huge. It is a leadership, it's a leadership best practice anyway, to be empathetic and just working with our colleagues. But if you can have the white male leader that you're thinking of understand how what is happening, whatever has happened, affects the people that they work with. Brian Stevenson says you have to get proximate with pain. You have to get proximate with folks in order to really change your perspective. I believe that, but I also believe in that education piece first, because oftentimes, as you all know, the weight of having the understanding and to catalyze the empathy is on BIPOC people and folks who have been traumatized already, and that's not effective. We don't want to re-traumatize people in order to make the point and have people be empathetic. So give them some understanding. Use some of the information that you might have gathered from doing town halls, listening sessions, individual interaction with different groups internally, any correspondence that might have come from an external source, meaning clients, alum, et cetera, who may be stakeholders with this person and who would help them to understand better why this is important. The other piece of this, and I know that you're probably like, roll, I roll, but it's true. We as diversity professionals have to have and also express our empathy for the leader. Think about this. If you're in a space, and many of them are, as woke as they can be, are still living in a space of privilege, which means that they can decide to access pain and trauma when they would like to. And when they do, it is not a fun thing, right? It's a lot of white male privilege, like words that make them uncomfortable just generally because of the way in which they might feel that they're weaponized against them. So one of the strategies I like to employ is to say, I know this is not easy. It's not easy, heavy is the head that wears the crown, to be in a position of leadership and also have to drive this painful change and painful awareness, and to be thoughtful about what you say and whom you say it to. That's a lot. And so the more that you can kind of say that, it kind of helps to build the trust with them as well. And to your point, someone asked a question about if it's too emotionally exhausting for you to inform an unaware white male colleague about a new racist incident, how do you suggest making sure they're aware of the issue? So I'm going to turn that question a little bit more, because while we can think about colleagues, I want you to think about this impact on leaders and then also people who are colleagues generally. If we're thinking of the leader, what they do based on this can catalyze the others, and then hopefully take away some of the need for you to be the person who is actually informing. But that's not always how it works. And so it depends on the nature. I'm happy to have you ask a more specific question, because I can then give you a little bit more details. But if it's not you at that time, you can be the person who provides the resources, etc., but you don't have to be the one that engages. We have to take care of ourselves to do this work, or it won't be effective. Because the other thing I also hear from white male leaders is that sometimes their diversity professional, whoever it is internally, is so passionate about it that they don't feel that they can be vulnerable. Right, so there's a delicate balance that we have to show, and by expressing empathy for them, they feel but better. The other piece of this is we have to go to the ego space, right? What is in it for them? If they get this right, understanding the incident, understanding their power and capacity and their privilege in that space, and then getting them to that hopeful place of allyship and wanting to do better, that is not just some old thing. When people get this right, it affects their influence and their legacy. And oftentimes when you have that intersection of white male leader who may be also older, legacy really resonates for them, right? It really helps that ego piece where it's like, my legacy. Of course I need to be better at this because this is important for what they will say about me. And resistance, then you can kind of counteract what's in it for me with the ego considerations. And then, of course, there's, us doing the diversity and inclusion work is we have to make the business case. Why should this be prioritized over every other thing that I think that they have to do? And the answer is that they can no longer compartmentalize, because it is seeping into your, even through virtual and Zoom, into your workplace, right? The business case is if you have folks who are associates, staff, partners, counsel, everybody, even professional staff within the space who are in pain and traumatized, and they're waiting to hear from them and for them to lead and for the organization, the firm to do better. And then they hear it. It won't be magic, but it will be that sort of okay, at least we're thinking about this. And then they do the work better, right? The business case is not just the money you make, but it's thinking about the value proposition of the people internally and them having to continue to be responsive to all of your needs, and then also being a leader in this space and showing it for your staff as well as your clients that this is not something that is just words, but it's words and actions. And you can get there, but again, that should be a part of your dialogue. The greater good is the last thing here, but ideally it would be the first thing, right? We cannot continue to have instances where we are all collectively witnessing trauma and this sort of amplification of racism in so many different ways. And this year's been so painful with, these killings, as well as the momentum going into the election and our current state. And, this is, the politics is personal. And so it makes it a lot harder. particularly when you're thinking of some of the folks who you have to interact with may not be aligned with you politically, and think that that is okay because of the fact that they're apolitical, right? They're good people, and they don't, they don't see color. All of those things that don't actually help to have people feel included. So you have to encourage them to engage in dialogue. This is probably one of the hardest pieces that I'm recommending because they're scared. We live in a cancel culture, right? So you say the wrong thing, and where does it end up? It ends up on Above the Law, on the New York Times, anywhere else. And so within that sort of framework, and then encouraging bravery and authenticity, it's kind of anti to each other, where often they'd rather just not say anything. And there are many firms who made no comments or at all. They made no statements, at least not visibly to the public at all, right? And a lot of that comes from fear. A lot of that it comes from the place of what will our clients think, because not all our clients have our same ideologies. We don't want it to affect our business case, and a myriad of other things, which of course, feel free to share some of the other reasons why they may not have wanted to engage, but I think the word cloud was expressive to that. You have to align them and have them understand intent versus impact. You can have a great intent in terms of what you're doing and what you're saying, but the impact, if you say the wrong thing, can be detrimental, and they may not be aligned. And so that's why they need your support. That's why you as a professional is someone they should be relying on. And you should be asking them. I have the things that I want to do with you. I want to talk about these things. I want to inform you, educate, and then I have an action plan that I'd like to go for. But where do you need support? Let them at least have agency to be able to amplify and say, this is where I would need like your support, so that you can say, great, I can support you here if you can. And here are some other areas that I feel like you would need some additional support through this process of us being responsive and hopefully shifting some of our thoughts based on, or our actions as a firm based on what has happened, whatever it is. Okay. And then for every single thing that you commit to with this person or persons, you have to have an after action review. So yes, let's do small roundtables with some of our Black and Brown associates, and I'm going to help you with some talking points. And then after that, we're going to talk about how it went. It can't just be we do the thing, oh, thank goodness it's over, and nothing else. That after action review is where you can really show and shine as a diversity professional and the value proposition that you provide to them. It's not just there to do stats. It's not just there for you to, be that face when it comes to recruiting. You are there as an expert. And the more that they can see and trust your expertise and understand that aligning with you, connecting with you, and trusting you is beneficial to them, the better. So, managing resistance. Some of you already amplified where the resistance might come from, but here's a couple of things that I was thinking about as well. You have to address resistance head on, and this is challenging. Oftentimes, white male leaders don't want to hear anything outside of what they want to say, and oftentimes they're not in a listening space. You can do a couple of things. If you have the relationship and the trust to be able to say, insert name here, I got to talk to you about what's going on. It seems to me, or it's been reflected to me, that some of this has been a little bit harder, and there was an assumption that it would be a little bit easier given what we've seen, whatever that faux statement is, so that they can't hide behind it. Because if it's on the table, we have to address it, hopefully. Is it fair? Oftentimes, while they sort of act in this leadership space, they are afraid, to my point earlier, they're afraid to address something that is painful, that they may not know a lot about, that they're scared to make a mistake on. And you can say, again, getting back to empathy, I know this is not easy. This is not easy to do this or to address this, and that's why I'm here to help you. Is it unchecked privilege? Probably, right? Right? It's probably at the intersection of all of these things, but there are strategies, right? We think about some of the ways that you elevate privilege within training spaces by showing them where their privilege exists, why some people may not feel open to be able to speak to them, because often privilege is just sitting in the leadership space, and then all the other places of intersection, right? White privilege, male privilege, et cetera, et cetera. People don't feel like they can tell the emperor that he doesn't have any clothes on. And so laying that groundwork and saying, just as an FYI, here's a couple of reasons why it might not happen, but I want to be in a space where I can be authentic and frank with you so that we can get to a better place. The other piece is this. Well, we've always done this, right? Well, we've never made a statement before. We've never said Black Lives Matter before. Why do we need to do this now? And to that, you go back to the case in terms of the informing and what's happening internally and externally that they need to be aware of, not just globally and societally, but specifically with the people who you have to engage with, who he has to engage with to do this work, to be who he wants to be as a leader. So that's clients, big clients, institutional clients. That is your internal client, right? Nothing happens in the firm if the lawyers don't do the work, if the staff doesn't do the work, if the professionals don't do their job. And then tell them this. And that last bullet point is something my therapist says. So I'm giving you some free therapy. She says, growth begins where comfort ends. And that means that you cannot advance change, particularly around things that people have been managing and grappling with their entire lives, and do things the exact same way you've done it before. Right? So saying that to them, and as you can probably hear, I am suggesting asking for one-on-one coaching conversations first before you do anything else, because they have to be able to be vulnerable with you. What you see is that privilege, that ego come out when there's a group, because they have the posture, and that's how it usually shows up. A question: when having these difficult convos in small or large groups, many of the leadership doesn't participate, although they say injustice is unacceptable and unrest should be addressed. It's contradictory. You're absolutely right. Part of this and their actual response being effective is they have to show up, and not just showing up in words, but showing up in actions. And I said this to one of my coaches recently, and to do it in silence. Part of this is you have to hearing what is happening and then responding. And oftentimes, because they're so used to being in this leadership space, they're used to being able to banter and provide their things. But, I'll just say it, call it what it is. White men take up space. And when they take up space, they're usually unaware that them taking up that space and that space taking up maybe minimizing or shutting other people down in the meantime. So again, in that difficult space that we can be in, is to say, here's some recommended ways in which for you to navigate this conversation and this dialogue. Again, we can recommend, we can be in that space of recommendation, but they're not always going to do what we need them to do, unfortunately. And I want to call your attention to asking me more questions. I want to dialogue. I left a good amount of time at the end for your engagement with this, so I can give you Coach Paula-ness. Activate and collaborate. Where are they on their path to allyship? Do they consider themselves an ally, even though we know that allyship is not something they can don themselves? Do other people consider them allies? Okay, at this time. If not, just is that someplace they want to go? Is that something that they think is important to them at this time? And oftentimes the answer is not yet. I'm not quite sure. But this is where you bring in your recommended actions. Oftentimes, and especially this summer, it was the recommendation of let's have a statement that we're going to make about the thing, not both, at least internally, and then sometimes externally as well, in order to say that this is not okay. We are going to be responsive to this in our own sort of ethos in order to affect the world better. Many firms were saying that they were going to start doing social justice and racial justice work in their pro bono, and saying they were giving money to lots of different places. And the trajectory was in March, we have no more money. There's a freeze. We can't spend anything else. Nothing's happening. We're in a pandemic. And then right in May it was George Floyd, and then it was like we have $50,000 to donate to the NAACP, which is fine. That's not my issue. But there was never, at least not in this strategic way, dialogues internally where stakeholders were a part of it, where there were downloads and there was continued action and there were action plans actually developed. So this is where, again, you're bringing in your expertise. This is what I think we should do. Let's call in, again, who are the other stakeholders that need to be engaged for us to do this? In many of your firms, I wouldn't even call it hierarchy, but just the actual structure of the firm means that if we're thinking of like the managing partner or the partnership generally, they are going to go to certain stakeholders for everything that they think affects the business of the firm before they make any action. And that sometimes includes you as a diversity professional, and sometimes it doesn't. So for there, who are the people who are going to help you to get your strategy out and to help him to engage with it. And then how can you show your stuff, right? You need to see the draft of whatever's going to go out. You need to give your feedback. You need to talk about the steps and the stakeholders who will engage. You need to be able to show them that they can trust you and that you're going to continue to engage with them on whatever you commit to. With this, we want to encourage leaders to be better. And as I wrote this, I was like, what does that mean? It just means that they have to be active. Nothing changes when you're stagnant, right? Getting to be vocal is really on that path of allyship when you're saying, okay, I know what has happened. I'm informed. I've educated myself about some of the context of this with the support of my diversity professional or our team. And now I'm committed to sustained effort and change. It may not be that we know all the sustained effort and change that we're going to commit to, but I'm committed to doing X thing as we go forward. This is an important piece of this. So many people express pain, continue to express pain about the silence of some of their white male leaders within the firm, because the expectation was that they were going to take this mantle up and say, I don't know everything, but I do want to do something. And the fear that we talked about before, the ego space, all of the things at that intersection that I just talked about really impacted some of what was going on. And so the last piece of this that needs to be addressed deeply before I get to your questions is accountability. You can say all of the things that we said. I want to make sure that you're empathetic and you're informed and you're educated, and we brought in stakeholders and you know some of the information both externally and internally. But it's accountability, and I think this is another place that you can be instructive with my white male leaders. What are the methodologies you can use? There might be some that you're already thinking of, and I'd love for you to share with me on Mentee some of the ways in which you hold your white male leaders or colleagues accountable to the things that they have said and that they want to do. But here are some of my thoughts about this. Number one, we all live by our calendars, right? So you have an initial meeting with them. What's happening within the follow-up? When are we going to follow up? I'm going to check back in with you because this is something that's continuing. It's Monday. I'm going to check back with you on Wednesday to see what has happened, what decisions that you've made, what we're going to go forward to, et cetera, et cetera. Prioritizing the response or status on meeting agendas. How many of us have meetings where there's no actual agenda? It's to this place where lawyers love to talk, and we end up having our meetings where we have a 15-minute agenda that we could have just gotten through. But to the extent that there is an agenda, this should be prioritized, right? This is not at the bottom. This is happening. It's affecting productivity, and there's pain happening within our space. We have to be responsive to it, and there's an external push for us to be more vocal, whatever the sort of extent of what's happening is. Checking in after other scheduled meetings. So to the extent that or you've recommended a sort of run of show of things that this leader should do, check in. I know that you had the meeting with Jane today about the communications piece of this. How did it go? Is there additional support or resources that you need? And that's checking in with both the leader as well as the stakeholder that they might have been connecting with. And then what for you, and then for you and the Coach E collectively, what are the benchmarks for progress? How do we know we've gotten better here? Are we going to say, we did a town hall, we're going to do another town hall in 6 weeks to kind of gauge where people are, what their thoughts are, recommendations on what we should be doing next? Is there any opportunity there? Is it that we're going to release another statement with specific actions that we're going to do that's outside of just the statement that we made saying Black Lives Matter and we're outraged? Now we're talking about the action that we're going to, I don't know, it could be a myriad of things depending on your firm and what you can commit to and what the person is willing to commit to. But accountability is a big piece of this. If it is not prioritized by you and others collectively in order to have this person be held accountable, it just won't work. And that's what we're seeing now. There are so many firms who are reaching out and talking about the fact that it's no longer prioritized on some of these spaces, right? And so what are you going to do in order to help with that at least? We have year-end meetings, budget, but there's still a need for us to talk about the impact of systemic oppression and racism on our internal and external cohorts, and what that means for us in our productivity and who we want to be as a firm. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides in just a moment, but I want to tell you that I have the slides as well as a full resource guide on my website. If you go to paulaedgar.com and engagements, and under the ALFDP event, you'll be able to download those things. And for us to stay connected, I'm going to provide the opportunity for you to ask me or make any comments in these last 5 minutes of anything you'd like to say to me right now about your questions or comments about coaching white men through issues of racial injustice and community unrest. We have awareness, education, developing response and action plan, and then making sure that you codify and systemically make follow-up a part of who you are collaboratively. So I will stop sharing the slides and come to looking where you are in the chat. Okay. I see the emotionally exhausted question I already responded to. There's just a couple of comments, but I'd like some questions. What are your thoughts? What are reflections? What other challenges are you dealing with right now at this time in regards to specifically this this topic? You know, just from the network that I have, I know that oftentimes it's getting them to even prioritize meeting with you. It's getting them to even understand that there's an issue that needs to be addressed. Some of that is taken care of by the news cycle, hopefully, but it's internally, what are you doing? You know, you had affinity groups this summer who were, you know, outraged and demanding action, and there was resentment that was happening on behalf of many of the white male leaders because they thought, I don't want to be pushed to this. That's another space to coach folks through. Like this, there's an opportunity within this discomfort in order for you to get better. So I'm going to put the Menti code in the chat again in case it's lost, because let's see. It's 70, 15, 44, and 8. I'd love to see your comments and questions at this time. And I'm looking at the chat too. We can't get some of our resistant leaders to even acknowledge this. How can you approach that conversation tactfully? I would start with the ego space. Ego and empathy are the 2 E's. And to say, I understand you as a leader want to be the best you can, and the way that this incident, this issue, this response has impacted or can impact this is if you don't get this right. And I want to be here in a space in order to effectively support you through this so that we can align both what your needs are as well as what their desires are. So, and I'll put this where the resources are in the chat again. Oh, thank you very much, everybody, for putting that link in there. Okay. Comments or questions? I'm looking for some other stuff. Some more on approaching the conversation tactfully. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the dialogue, sometimes it may be you supporting somebody else to have that conversation first to kind of bring you in. If you are in a space within your firm that you might not have been as valued as you should have been until there's an issue of racial injustice or community unrest, it might be that there's a colleague that you know is further down the allyship lane that can kind of help to facilitate the dialogue first and bring you into it as a resource that they recommend. Other thoughts or questions? So if we're looking right now at the resources, you'll see that I have a draft email response after your first meeting with the leader. I have lots of articles about white male leadership and how they can be aligned. I'd like to hear your thoughts and reflections on the fear some white men face in exposing what they don't know and haven't experienced. My thoughts are is that ego and stature get in the way of so much. And that is why one of the powerful places of this is to show them empathy, is to say, you know, this is not easy. How can I be in a space to support, not tell them, but to support them what it is, and let them build the trust in the relationship so that they can say, you know, actually, you know, I haven't read How to Be an Anti-Racist. I don't know, right? Like, so they can actually tell you, because then you can actually help them better. But that fear comes from, like, you know, this is huge momentous change in a very little bit of time for some people. People who may not even have thought about this because of the way privilege exists, they didn't have to, right? And then feeling as if their stature, their sort of comfort zone is going to be rocked by whatever they do in terms of response. And it's true. Our firm strategic plan called for one-on-one meetings with 32 firm leaders. Agree that first step is critical to build trust, then develop individualized goals and report to compensation committee. So I mean, that was like step number 11 and 12, and I was like, oh, I got 10. Listen, if you can connect this to their actual business case, like their own financial business case, you're good. But so many people have not done that or held themselves accountable to that commitment, and that's where the challenge is. This work can be a bit depressing. The bar does not move. As a coach who is primarily meeting with numerous stakeholders, are you seeing movement, or has something changed with everything that's happened with George Floyd? So yes, I have seen an openness for dialogue in a very profound way that I had never seen before, where many of the male leaders that I connected with understood that if they did not get this, not even right, but didn't kind of get moving with this, that they would be looked upon detrimentally. And I think that triggered that ego space for them and made them want to do this better. And it wasn't just people saying, you know, like all of the Black people or all of the women are upset and that's why you have to do something. It was everyone saying, we have seen essentially a public lynching, and there's continued inaction, continued, you know, things that are amplifying for us, that while we say Black Lives Matter because we need to own and claim it, that it's not being actually shown by some of the things that are happening societally, and that's scary. But if you can commit to them and have them see that they are literally the solution, they are a huge part of the solution. Marginalized people cannot unmarginalize themselves by themselves. There has to be a shift of power and privilege in order to do so. That then gives them the, of course, yes, you're right, it is a part of what I have to do. And then they'll also see that having that anti-racist lens, doing this in a different way, actually does make them a better leader. It's getting them to a space of lessening the discomfort in any way you can. Let's see, prefer working with white men, all groups. So I agree with you 100% in that many people resonate in the space, and they will hear that. I did not specify connecting regarding white women on this because we don't have enough time. But I do think it's an important part of this dialogue and discussion, because oftentimes the benefit of having diversity professionals who are also white women is that they might have the ear better. But then there are also ways in which all of our intersections can impede progress, which is a whole different part of dialogue that we can get into. But I appreciate the thought. Yes, this is not a solo, this is not only a white male issue. It is us having to really think about power and privilege and the ability for impactful and action-based advocates and allies. How do we make the case for white cis men to move out of the way, as in literally making space for new leadership? Whew. If I had that, I'd be rich. It is slower than I think having to just respond to an issue. An issue usually catalyzes them to act just because of the expediency that's needed. But to make the case institutionally that we got to do better here, you can use some of this momentum to do so, right? Like the feedback that you receive, you'll often hear if you are polling associates that they want to see themselves in leadership, right? They want to see the diversity that you tout in words also in action. But that's an individual and then a collective leadership commitment, and then there has to be ways in which to hold them accountable to doing differently there. And I don't have to talk to you all about bias, both explicit and implicit, and how it can get in the way of people looking at things and being self-aware enough to get that they might be in the way of some of the initiatives that they're trying to promote. White women obstacles have been an arrogance and an understanding all things diversity because of their agenda, pushing against efforts for other marginalized groups and wanting gender to be treated separately, not being intersectional in gender diversity efforts. Yes, I will put those bullet points in my next year's proposal because it's true. The reason why I focus on white men here is because if we look at all of our numbers in the profession, like they are at the most and the most powerful, and to be impactful, if we can get to them and then start some of the catalysts to change, it will be instructive and more impactful. I know I say that a lot, but it's true in having them commit and own that this has to do with them, and it's not just a diversity thing. It is them as a leader. They have to do this better, and you can support them in that, and there are things that you can be transformational in the work and the impact that you can have. I think, although I haven't gotten a you have to stop talking yet, please. But I think that I'm out of time, and I want to jump too much into or overlap into too much going on here. My homework for you is that you must connect with me on LinkedIn. You must download the resources from the website. I hope that they will be helpful. There's lots of great articles in there. Again, some more details on how to kind of look at this and the slides. There's a last question. I'll just answer this. How do you suggest keeping white men engaged as positive change agents in the moments where social justice is not the hot potato? Again, making sure that it becomes a priority point in terms of agendas. You know, your executive committee's meeting, where are we when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial justice? That's on the actual agenda. Committing perhaps in an action plan that there will be a quarterly statement that is made about where you are, what kinds of things you're doing. That way it makes them accountable, not just at that time, but further on. You know, having them commit to training and facilitated dialogues on a continual basis, not a one size fits all, check the box type thing, but really appropriate for different leadership levels, and to having the dialogue and conversation with stakeholders at the appropriate space and time, and then bringing folks together. Would one way to have white women consider approaching issues from an intersectional mindset be to eradicate women's affinity groups at firms? Well, I know the question's happening in the chat, but I want to respond to it. I don't think that it's the eradication of women's affinity groups. It's that we cannot equate women's affinity groups with white women. Like, if you're looking at your charge for your affinity group, it has to address the fact that there are sometimes aligned needs and oftentimes specific needs to people who sit at the intersection of women of color and of mothers and of single, like, there's a lot of different things to think about. But oftentimes you say women's initiative and it literally means white women. And when you talk about the intersection of other folks, people are like, what do you mean? But that's for the Black group to discuss. But as we now know, well, you should have known before, but we know Black women, right, have been the support and the sort of foundation of so many movements in different places, and women of color, period. And so prioritizing the fact that they have been catalysts, but then also have been undervalued, makes sense, right? And that's what should happen. We got to look at the charges of all of our affinity groups to make sure that they're not exclusive in their impact. I think, can somebody confirm to me I have to stop, or else I'll just keep answering questions because I love this. I deeply, deeply appreciate having the opportunity to connect with all of you. And for those of you who I don't know, I hope that we can get to know each other and perhaps work with each other. You do such important work, and I know that it's not easy. The person who talked about depression, I'll just end right here. The person who talked about depression, I will go back to my first point, which is you have to take care of yourself to do this work. Thank you so much for having me. I love all of you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paula, for the information as well as for the resources. We're going to take a networking break now for the next hour, and then I'll see you all back at 3:45. Thank you.